Well, friends, some of us remember the 1972 Munich Olympics, which were interrupted by the Palestinian terrorist organization Black September's attack on the Israeli delegation, in which they took 11 coaches and athletes hostage. That horrible incident ended in a disastrous rescue attempt by the German police at the Munich airport, prompting ABC Wide World of Sports host Jim McKay to go on air and make a historic proclamation. He said, quote, "When I was a kid, my father used to say, our greatest hopes and our worst fears are seldom realized. Our worst fears have been realized tonight. They're all gone." I doubt that I'm the only person who had a memory of that broadcast pass through my mind last Sunday, even when a very different news broadcast was watched by millions of people all over the world. I'm talking, of course, about the release of Romy Gonen, Doron Steinbrecher, and Emily Damari, three young women who were kidnapped into Gaza on October 7, 2023, and held there by Hamas for 471 days. It was our greatest hope that all the hostages would come home from captivity, and it was our greatest fear that they'd all be lost, just like what happened in Munich in 1972. Neither our greatest hopes nor our worst fears have been realized in this hostage situation. But on Sunday, we got to experience a national sense of joy and relief that some of these daughters of Zion have indeed come home finally. One Israeli official said there wasn't a dry eye in the country, and that was true. We all felt the same way, and we're looking forward to this coming Saturday when another 4 hostages are set to be released. We believe that there will be more female hostages. We hope again and pray that all the hostages will be released. Now, the ceasefire is scheduled for 42 days, with groups of hostages being released every 7 days in exchange for a continued release of Palestinian security prisoners, some of whom have tremendous amounts of blood on their hands, and all of whom are considered to be dangerous by the security services. 90 security prisoners were released on Sunday and are at this very moment back in their homes in Judea and Samaria, and some also, believe it or not, in the eastern neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Crazy as it sounds. The major international media networks covered this part of the arrangement, and most of the coverage focused on just a handful of released prisoners, most of whom were female. The subtext to all this coverage was that some Israeli women were released by Hamas, while some Palestinian women were released by Israel. However, as is so often the case, this subtext is at best half true. One of the released prisoners was Khalida Jarrar, who is 62 years old and was described over and over again as being held in, quote, administrative detention for nonviolent offenses. Of course, the inevitable comparison was made to Rosa Parks, the African-American woman who sparked the civil rights movement by refusing to move to a seat in the back of a Montgomery, Alabama city bus in 1955. However, Jarrar was an active member of the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine, a group designated as a terrorist organization by Israel, the United States, the European Union, Canada, and Japan. It also has the distinction of having pioneered the tactic of hijacking airplanes and taking passengers and crew back hostage in the 1960s and 70s. Members of this organization participated in the massacre on October 7, 2023, including the kidnapping of several Israelis and holding them hostage. Now, it's possible that some of the hostages are still held by them, but it's very difficult to know for sure. By the way, this is a good place to mention that the released hostages last weekend said they were sometimes held by Hamas in UN facilities. Yeah, the United Nations, or the United Nothings. Let's say it as it is. I think that's a pretty important detail in all this that shouldn't be forgotten. Back to Jarrar. Although she has never been convicted of a violent crime herself, it is beyond the realm of possibility that she has not been part of supporting those who did. This is not just some feisty grandma participating in acts of Rosa Parks-style civil disobedience, and many of the other prisoners released this week actually were convicted of violent acts. But to be fair and honest, I must point out that many of them were never convicted of anything. They were being held in what's called administrative detention, which means the security forces had reason to believe they were part of plans to carry out violent attacks, and imprisoning them was necessary to protect Israeli public security and safety. Now, with all that being made clear, there was one other aspect of the ceasefire agreement that we need to talk about, and that's the gradual withdrawal of the IDF from positions in the Gaza Strip that Hamas very obviously wants to reoccupy. Hamas has said they want the IDF to eventually completely withdraw from the Strip and are demanding a permanent end to the war they started, which I guess hasn't gone the way they planned. Some in Israel are angry that there has even been a temporary ceasefire and are saying that Israel should continue grinding away at Hamas until they're completely defeated. Indeed, the leader of one faction in the governing coalition bolted to the opposition in protest of the ceasefire, and the leader of another is saying he'll do the same thing if the war doesn't start up again after the end of this 42-day ceasefire. Well, as I've said before on this program, I'm not a general. I wasn't even an officer when I did my time as a draftee in the IDF, those many years ago. I'm not even sure I'd remember how to shine my boots or brush my teeth. No, I can do that the correct way anymore. Although I'm sure I was trained on those procedures at some point. However, I have some analysis of the military and strategic situation, and it goes like this. Israel is a nation state with a civil governing administration and an army that is subordinated to that administration. The wars we fought in 1948, 1956, 1967, 1970, and 1973 were all against enemies who were organized in the same way. So when we defeated the armies on the battlefield, we could bring the wars to a conclusion by negotiating some kind of settlement with the governments who controlled them. We had some help in those negotiations, particularly in 1973 from the United States and other Western governments. Wars in this part of the world had the effect of increasing the price of oil, which hurt the world economy, so everyone wanted these wars to be as short as possible. Also, since the Soviet Union was supporting Israel's enemies in all these wars, the U.S. and Western Europe wanted Israel to win. A win for Israel against the Arab Legion armies was seen by everyone as a win by the West against the USSR and vice versa. Today, Israel is still a nation state with a civil governing administration and an army that is subordinated to that administration. But almost everything else about the situation has changed. The enemy we're fighting in Gaza isn't an organized nation state, and even to the degree that they have a civil administration, their armed forces aren't subordinate to them. Furthermore, Hamas doesn't have a capital city for IDF troops to enter and raise their flag over the parliament building the way the Soviet flag was raised over the Reichstag building in Berlin by the Red Army on May 2nd, 1945. That's probably what people who say they want to see Hamas defeated means, but it's simply not available. Also, the positions of the great powers have changed a lot since 1973. Oil is still important to the world economy, but other sources of it are available. Also, the cultural influence of Arab and Muslim countries on Western governments, the relative power of Russia and China, and many other factors have also changed dramatically since 1973. So all of this, when you add it up to the great powers having different policies than what existed back then. Finally, Henry Kissinger is no longer with us, for better or for worse. Be that as it may, the bottom line is that Israel and the IDF have accomplished a lot in this war, but Hamas has managed to survive it, if you can believe that. And as long as one teenager with a green headband is still throwing rocks at an IDF tank or shooting upon it, they're going to say they weren't finished off or defeated. There's no point in arguing with them, and sadly there's many people all over the world who will take their claim of having defeated the IDF seriously while still condemning Israel for having carried out a quote-unquote genocide of Palestinians. That's a completely absurd contradiction, but it's also a fact of life. Another fact of life is that Israel's main enemy, Iran, is still out to destroy us, and the leaders of that country don't care how much of their own people suffer economic hardship and deprivation while they spend all the money pursuing their goal of wiping us off the map. For years, they've been smuggling in weapons, equipment, pursuing their goal of wiping us off and bringing it into Judea and Samaria, the heartland, the breadbasket of Israel, in an effort to create another terror front against us. Now, Israel has been hard at work battling on this front for the past year, and to give credit where it's due, the Palestinian Authority police have also done their best to push back against Iran's proxy forces during this time. For weeks now, they were engaged in a fierce battle to try and regain control of the city of Jenin. But on Tuesday, the PA police admitted they were unable to do the job, pulled out, and let the IDF go to try and clear out these armed terrorist groups. That IDF operation in Jenin is ongoing, and I'll have an update about it next week. At the same time, the IDF has had to reinforce the units that are deployed to southern Syria to guard the approaches to the Golan Heights border amidst the still unstable situation in that country. Last but not least, the IDF is asking for another 30 days in southern Lebanon beyond the end of the current ceasefire with Hezbollah. They keep finding Hezbollah bunkers filled with weapons that were meant to be used for an invasion of Israel, so they need to clear all those bunkers and tunnels out. And meanwhile, the Lebanese National Army is still taking its time moving into these areas to make sure Hezbollah doesn't just roll back in and set up shop again as soon as the IDF leaves. But I want to be honest with all of you. I don't see that the Lebanese army is strong at all, and we may return to war on the northern front soon. Last but not least, the Houthis in Yemen are still threatening Israel with ballistic missiles and drones, but that might be about to change. In other words, friends, there might be a ceasefire in Gaza, but this war is far from over. That is why here at Vision for Israel, we have not stopped or even slowed down our projects to provide Israeli communities with bomb safety shelters, supplies, trainings, ambulances, and medical first responders, equipment that is needed, as well as to the firefighters. It's also why we haven't stopped providing assistance to families in financial distress, of which there are many. If you'd like to help us do this work, you can visit our website, visionforisrael.com, and click on the Projects tab. There you'll see some of the many ways we're working to bless the people of Israel in this time of trial, and that includes all the people here: Jews, Arabs, Druze, tourists, anybody who lives within inside the country, and everyone else. Now, friends, it's time to talk about some really good news, and that is the inauguration that we attended for the 47th President of the United States, Donald J. Trump. That's right. In his first few days in office, even in the very first hours of his new administration, there was lots of good news for Israel, as Trump held an event at the Capital One Arena in Washington, D.C., in which he hosted several released hostages and family members of hostages on stage. He spoke warmly to the people of Israel and about the people of Israel at this event, telling us that he mourns with us and is very firmly on our side in this conflict against terrorism and evil. Now, speaking for myself, I do not wish to sound ungrateful for all the assistance and support the Biden administration gave Israel in this war. However, it is undeniable that the new Trump administration is setting a new tone, and many in Israel are cheering, and I am one of them. In his first few days in office, President Trump has reversed many decisions by his predecessor, including revoking sanctions on several individuals in Israel's settler community. Now, Biden did that last February in order to appear even-handed, as he was giving such strong support to Israel to fight in Gaza. But apparently, Trump doesn't worry about being even-handed. He also unfroze, Trump, restrictions on weapons transfers to Israel, notably including 2,000-pound bombs, which will be handy if we have to reinitiate hostilities against Hezbollah. He also relisted the Houthis as a terrorist organization. Biden had them delisted as a humanitarian gesture to try and get more food aid into Yemen through ports that the Houthis had completely controlled, but he never reimposed the designation even after the Houthis started firing missiles and drones at Israel. Not to mention international shipping in the Bab al-Mandab Straits. But now they're back on the terrorism list, and we can hope that means serious plans will be made and then acted on to sort them out once and for all. Well, friends, there's so much more to share with you. I'm looking forward to this new administration in Washington. That's why we need to pray for all those amongst President Trump's cabinet secretaries, as well as Vice President Vance, and of course President Trump himself, and for all the people of America and Israel together, that we stay joined together as one. Well, friends, we're out of time for this report, and I want to once again keep the tradition of ending with some good news, so here it is. This week, IDF Chief of Staff Herzi Halevi acknowledged his responsibility for the mistakes and failures that led up to the October 7th massacre and announced that he is tendering his resignation to be effective March 6th. Several other senior IDF officers quickly did the same, saying that the emergency has passed and there are lower-ranked men who have fought well in this war and are ready to move up and take their places. Now, I want to make it clear that I have tremendous respect for all these IDF officers and also gratitude for the many years of service they gave to our country. I also was a soldier in the IDF, and I understand that respect is needed. But the reason I say that it's so important that they've resigned is that it means they're taking responsibility for what went wrong. They're setting an example for younger people that when you make a mistake, you own up to it and you don't try to hide it or blame someone else. That's a lesson we badly need in our world today, and I'm glad that we've got men in Israel willing to teach it. Now, I don't want to get too political here, but I can't avoid adding that these military officers aren't the only people who made mistakes and should resign now that the emergency has largely passed. I also want to just say and mention with the political echelon, not to mention all the spies, diplomats, and others who surely deserve to take part of the blame for what happened, suffered barely any consequences. I hope that a bit of history doesn't repeat itself, but we'll see what happens. So until next time, friends, I'm Barry Siegel. I greet you all with a hearty hug and shalom. And this has been the VFI News. Shalom, shalom.